to Solving for the Undefined podcast. I'm your host, Johanna, founder of Miss Kuiper's Classroom, the place that equips teachers in creating a healthy math classroom where students can thrive, no matter their academic abilities. But it's not always about the numbers, and that's why I'm here, bringing you the formulas to solve your problems, math and otherwise, plus strategies on cultivating that necessary math mindset. And that's what you can count on. Hello, happy Monday, and welcome to part 2 of our Preparing for the First Days of School series. Before we jump into today's episode, I wanted to remind you about the Reignite the Math Classroom conference that's happening 2 weeks from now. August 8th is the opening date where you will be given access to now 13 amazing conferences just for you. You will also be receiving a goodie bag valuing at $60, so it's resources that we have compiled for you to reignite your math classroom and start your year off strong. Also, during the month of August and partway into September, we will be doing live weekly Q&A in a private Facebook group for you to join. So we'll be answering any questions that you have after watching the conference videos. Plus, you'll also have access to all the things in the Facebook group and the videos themselves for a whole month. So from 8/8 to 9/9. Can you tell we're math teachers and we love numbers? I'm super pumped for this, and if you are ready to join, you can click the link in the show notes that take you to the Reignite the Math Classroom page, or you can head on over to the show notes on my blog and receive the link there as well. If you have any questions about it, please feel free to reach out. We have an Instagram page where you can ask us any questions, or you can DM me on Instagram, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. All right, jumping into today's episode. So last episode, we talked about how we learn, how the brain actually physically, neurologically learns and retains knowledge. So if you haven't listened to episode 16 yet, I would suggest go back and listen to that one first, and then come back here to listen to part 2. This series is all about understanding the research behind how we learn and what that means in our classrooms. So today we're going to be talking about growth mindset. And the goal of this episode is I want you to be able to understand what growth mindset is and how intrinsic motivation plays a key role in that, and then implementing those things into your classroom. So this series is based on research. So research I've done about other people's research. So I've researched things about growth mindset, intrinsic motivation, and how they intertwine and then apply in a classroom setting. All the links to my research on other people's research will be on my website under this week's episode. One thing I found and other people noted in their own research was most of the neuroscience research done is focused on attention, memory, and decision making. Growth mindset is still a relatively new term in the science world. So growth mindset itself, to give you a definition, is the belief that intelligence can be nurtured through learning and effort. So one of the first researchers into growth mindset was Carol Dweck, I'm hoping I'm saying that right, who actually coined the terms fixed mindset and growth mindset in 2007 when she released her research in a book called Mindset, The New Psychology of Success. In this study that she published, she followed 2 groups of middle school students. I was super excited when I saw that because I teach middle school students, so I know this is specifically going to apply to my kids. One of the groups that she followed was taught about growth mindset, while the other group was taught about study skills. The growth mindset group was taught specifically how intelligence can be nurtured through challenging tasks and problems, and they got to practice that. And so as a result, looking at the end of the study, the growth mindset had a positive effect on the students' motivation and academic performance. So that shows us that growth mindset ties to academic achievement, engagement, and willingness to accept new challenges. So students with growth mindset focus on improvement and see effort as a way to build their abilities. Additionally, and I thought this was super cool, they see failure as part of the learning process. So it reminded me of, I had to look up who said this, but Ariana Huffington, she said failure is not the opposite of success. It's actually part of success. And so I think also Thomas Edison said something very similar. He learned 99 ways to not make a light bulb, and that helped him find the one way to do it. I think in a previous episode I mentioned that, and I said Thomas Jefferson, not Thomas Edison. So, good times. But failure is a key component in order for us to be successful. There has been no one in the grand scheme of our existence that has never failed. And that failure is a key stepping stone for us to actually figure out how we can be successful. In another study, fixed mindsets showed a tendency to focus on judgment, meaning they avoided the situations where they might fail or they have to work hard. And so they were more concerned about hiding their perception of intelligence or lack thereof than actually doing the work and trying. And then I was super into all the things that Carol Dweck had done because she was the first person to ever really talk about this idea of growth mindset. So in another study that she was a part of, she gave students a difficult test, and then after they took the test, told them that they hadn't done well on it. Then they gave those students a choice. Now this is super interesting. They asked the students, would they rather look at the tests of those who had done worse than them or better than them? The students who had growth mindset chose to look at the tests of people who had done better than them so that they could learn how to do it better. But the people with fixed mindsets looked at the people who had done worse than them to potentially make themselves feel better. That is mind-blowing to me, the distinction between those two groups of people. It almost makes me want to conduct a very similar experiment in my classroom, but I don't know how it'd go. It would be so interesting to see if that would be a definitive response with those who have growth mindset versus fixed mindset. And then in my research, I found this one website called Mindset Kit. It has some really cool resources, by the way. You can find the link in the show notes. But it just has a quick summary of a bunch of different growth mindset studies done. So there was one study about middle school students looking at the impact of fixed versus growth mindset on achievement in math. That was super cool that it was math specific. Although they said it was because math was a subject that many students find challenging. So we'll work on that part. But students with a growth mindset earned higher math grades over time than compared to students with a fixed mindset. Boom. That's crazy. And I'll talk about later how that idea also fits into intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation. So stay tuned. And another study by this guy or gal, I don't actually know, Romero, growth mindset. The mindset have also been shown to predict who will take more advanced courses over time. So starting with some middle school students, they followed them over the course of their schooling career and found that the students who had growth mindset were more likely to be placed in advanced math over time because people with growth mindset are willing to go for those challenges and won't shy away from those types of things. So that was super cool to read. And now I'm going to talk about two more things about growth mindset that really fascinated me. All of it does, but this part specifically. So growth mindset focuses on students learning rather than simply performing well. So Carol Dweck did this other study about praise affecting children's behavior. In this study, she took a group of students, a group of fifth graders, and had them with blocks, colored blocks, create different pictures. Now they started with super simple, easy ones. And one group was praised for their effort, while another group was praised for the intelligence. So the way that sounded was, wow, you did really well. You must be really smart. Or for the other group, wow, you did really well. You must have tried really hard. And between those two things, Carol saw two different things form as the challenges got harder. So the amount of blocks increased and the challenge of this puzzle got harder. The students who were praised for their intelligence stopped working on puzzles when they got stuck. Listen to that again. Students who were praised for their intelligence stopped working when the challenge got hard. Versus the group that was praised for their effort, they persevered through those challenges and ended up succeeding at most of the challenging puzzles. But here's the real kicker. After they were done with the challenges, they were asked a question. If I give you some more problems, would you like more problems like these that are pretty easy so you'll do well? Or more problems like these that'll be hard but you might learn a lot from them? The students who were praised for their intelligence chose to go back to the easier problems. But the students who were praised for their effort chose to do more challenging problems. So this gives us keen insight into how us as teachers can really affect how our students are shaped and how their mindsets are shaped just by us talking to them. I thought that was really interesting, and it made me feel more aware of how I praise my students for getting the right process or getting the right answer. So definitely gave me something to think about for this upcoming year. But even just thinking about this was a controlled setting in a span of maybe an hour, and how just in that small amount of time, the praise they were given directly impacted how they did in that particular activity. It didn't follow them outside of that activity, just in that specific activity. So again, you as the teacher, every single day, have the opportunity to help students see that their effort matters and have them work hard to do those challenging things. That blows my mind. Okay, last thing about growth mindset before I talk about intrinsic motivation. This study was by a group of people looking at how mindset affects learning from mistakes. And I'm just going to kind of read it because it has some more neuroscience-y information, and I want to make sure I get it right. So they put an EEG cap on their heads to measure how active their brains were. Now, an EEG cap, if I'm reading this correctly, measures their brain activation. So in this study, they asked the participants a trivia question. When the participants gave the answer, the scientists would then tell them if they were correct or incorrect. Otherwise, they were given feedback on their work. The scientists found that the participants with a growth mindset and a fixed mindset both had active brains when they were told whether they were right or wrong. So all participants paid attention to the performance feedback. But the interesting thing happened next. When the participants got the wrong answer, the scientists told them the correct answer. And again, the scientists looked at how active the participants' brains were. The brains of the people with a growth mindset were significantly more active than the brains of people with a fixed mindset. So the people with a fixed mindset were tuning out after they found out they were right or wrong. They were uninterested in learning the correct answer. They were just curious if they were right or wrong, and then they tuned out after hearing they were either right or wrong. And so then at the end of the study, the participants were then given a pop quiz on the same trivia questions. Not surprisingly, the people with a growth mindset did better because they were actually listening to the correct answers. So this gives us, again, another insight into how mindset plays a key role in us giving feedback to our students. People with growth mindset are more willing to listen to feedback to help them get better, and then they'll end up doing better. So we need to be cultivating an air of growth mindset in our classroom, and us as the teachers have a key role in doing that. All right, moving to intrinsic motivation. So intrinsic motivation is defined as doing of an activity for its inherent satisfaction rather than some separable consequence. Meaning the person is moved to act out of the fun or challenge of an activity rather than an external product, pressure, or reward. So it's important to note that intrinsic is not necessarily synonymous with internal, and same with extrinsic and external. And so I'm going to share 3 scenarios that the research article published by Frontiers in Neurobiotics shared to kind of give you an example of what I'm talking about. Example number 1. A child that thoroughly does his homework might be motivated by avoiding the punishment of his parents if he did not do it. This action is clearly external, and the homework is not being done for its own sake, but because of the potential retribution, is that the right word, of his parents. So he's extrinsically and externally motivated. Example number 2. It is possible for a child to thoroughly do his homework because he is persuaded that it'll get him the job of his dreams later down the road when he will be an adult. So this case, the cause for the action is internally motivated, but the homework again is not done for its own sake, but because of the outcome of it being giving him a good job in the future. So internally generated, extrinsically motivated. And finally, example number 3, a child who does their homework thoroughly for the fun of it, and because he experiences the pleasure of discovery of new knowledge, or considers, for example, its math problem to be just as fun as playing a video game, in that case, the behavior is extrinsically and internally motivated. So those are some scenarios to help you better understand extrinsically, extrinsically, internally, externally motivation. So in all of the research I did, I won't read you any studies, but what conclusion I found is when students were given choice inside of their academic day, that enhanced their intrinsic motivation, their buy-in. And this then produced a better effort, task performance, and overall perceived competence among some other outcomes. So, biggest takeaway from helping students become intrinsically motivated is giving them choice. No one really likes to be told what to do. And so when we give students a choice, even if it's just as simple as pick 3 problems from this page to do, it's allowing them to become intrinsically motivated because they get to choose which problems are just as fun as playing a video game. Not really. I mean, there's hope that that's true, but it allows them to choose and make decisions for themselves. So now that I've given you the whole thing about growth mindset and a quick snippet about intrinsic motivation, some correlations between the two. So inside of your brain, growth mindset is tied to the part of your brain that is related to learning and control. So, and then there's a part with your prefrontal cortex as well, talking about memory, attention, cognitive abilities, and stuff like that. So, control is a piece of your growth mindset. So when students are given choice, you're giving them intrinsic motivation, which then helps stimulate the growth mindset because of the areas in their brain that they are placed. So, that was just like mind-blowing. I'm going to say it again because it was just so cool. Growth mindset is tied to the part of your brain related to learning and control. That part of your brain is also responsible for motivation. So, when you are giving your students choice, they have control, which is giving them motivation, which is then tying to their growth mindset part of their brain. I just can't even. That's just so cool to know how our brains are structured, so I know how to give my students the best opportunity in my classroom to grow and become better students, to then become better people in our world. And on that amazing note, that is all I have for you for today's part 2 of preparing for the first days of school series. Next week, I'm going to kind of tie growth mindset as well as the how our brain learns together in some more applicable ways that we can tie that into our classroom. So stay tuned for episode 18 coming out next week, so that way you can be best prepared for your first days of school. Thanks for listening to today's episode, and I hope you have a fabulous week. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode. To find all the links and resources to things talked about in this episode, head on over to MissKuipersClassroom.com and click on podcast.